to record videos, and there would be times where I'd knock it over and the thing would fall over, and sorry, that was a really inconsequential story. but yeah.
Well, you gotta do it.
Yeah, make it work.
Have you had any time to read any of the readings?
Yeah,
Feel that?
Fortunately, he's assigning some ones that are like kind of popular. So, at least for like some of the research I did, so that it's like, I'm familiar with some of these papers, but some of them are like really intense too, like methods heavy papers. Do I usually sit here? Are you sure?
100% positive. You don't have to move, dude. It's cool.
Oh, I feel like I was like not seeing this.
No, but I always sit there, accidentally knock that, and then I just want to fix it.
So
So,
have the faces of the cats.
no, you haven't. I'm not sure I want to see.
Okay.
No, I mean, like, at school.
I will maybe one day show you. So it's actually like cats that get put down at like
That is so
shelters.
sad. Yeah?
I don't know how they can, but they have like faces that like you're like this could not have been the way to put the cat down. Like
No, actually, it was really funny because Mark emailed Tommy and was like, can you run Calvin because Alberto has to put together dead cats? I was just like, what? Like, we read that email. I didn't read it yet, and I was talking to Mark, and Mark was just like, did you read Alberto's email? And I was like, no. What is it? And then I read it, and I was like, oh my god, I could never, ever put together dead cats. It's terrible.
yeah.
Yeah. And then Alex was like, have you, so you know how I'm trying to like go to Scotland, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. And I have a cat, and I'm like, oh, I want to bring the cat across, you know, whatever. Alex is really like, we can't do that. And I was like, Mom, you should just make mittens out of your cat. It's to always be with you. Like, are you serious? And he's like, or you can just do it when it's alive. And he
I
just
can
makes
show you how to skin it if that's what you wish.
That's not what I wish at all. I want to safely import my cat to St. Andrews. Which would be weird, granted, but like, whatever, she's really cute.
Have you ever heard of this cranial nerve zero?
Is that something we're supposed to read?
No. It's
Oh.
completely on the
Oh,
side.
just like completely unrelated new topic.
Yeah.
No, cranial nerve 0.
Or N.
N. N meaning the number of
No.
what?
N meaning no.
No.
Yeah.
What is it?
Vomeronasal system is what they think.
The what?
Like, you know, like they think it's the, you know, like the
Oh, yeah.
vomeronasal organ.
Nope. No
It's
idea.
what, like, reptiles and stuff like that use to pick up pheromones.
Really?
Oh.
So they think that it's like that.
Really?
That,
Oh.
Yeah.
like, adult humans like, do have it, and it goes through the cortical site and the nose, and it, like, it's just like, no one actually knows what it does. It's there, and it's there, it's active, and it actually, it has like a neurohormonal effect, and it releases releasing luteinizing hormone.
Really?
Oh, because you're
Yeah.
leaving.
Mind blowing, right?
Mind blowing because that's the hormone that's present 24 hours before ovulation.
Here you go. Okay.
Send me that. You should send me that so I can read it and avoid submitting my paper.
No. Yeah, I've nothing. I have like one
I'm actually getting into like a new argument with my old
draft that I
advisor
have to send out for
about this paper because he wants me to send it to like a journal that is like a 0.9 impact factor. And I'm like, really? Really?
I need to start.
Well, I mean, what are you
doing,
trying to get it published in right now?
But
Well, it got rejected last one.
idiot, yeah.
But I know why, and it's totally my fault.
Dude, yeah, like.
And it's my fault because I was in a hurry to submit so I could say I was under review for to see another grant going through. And it was like, it's just been like a clusterfuck for the past year or 3.
So no news on the St. Andrews from it?
No, they're supposed to.
Do you want me to?
Are you supposed, do you have to like, do you have
it's okay, I really don't
to
care.
do more interviews, or did you already like?
I skipped.
Do everything.
Yeah, I skipped everything and went straight to like an interview.
Yeah, so, but you're,
I'm
basically you
done
don't
on
have to, okay, so,
Yeah.
so they just have to decide whether to
No,
give you one of the really
most
fun
always
positions.
students that show up.
Yeah,
Most of the
there's
professors do,
so they had 30 people
but there
apply.
was a popular conference.
15 people were interviewed for 3 positions, which is not very much.
But
And like they accept,
yeah,
they offer admission, but they don't offer funding. They also don't have any TA positions. Like no one
So
does.
no, like assistant.
Yeah, there's nothing. So now Scotland's trying
everyone thought it was
to
great.
do this
My
whole
advisor said-
independence shit.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
So I don't even I don't even know what's gonna happen anymore.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, did it made sense?
Yeah,
It was.
you're very enthusiastic, good presenter.
I am enthusiastic, and I practiced that way too many times. So, but I shouldn't.
How many publications you got in review right now?
How many are published or under review?
Under review?
4.
Jesus.
But they're because I'm on other projects. You know, I've been doing this for a few years now, so like we collaborate with other people. They have data, we have data. You know, like anyone else. But
Pretty cool, man.
yeah, but it's annoying because they're taking forever to go through. This girl, you know, I mean, just stupid shit on paper that's been under review for like over a year.
What's the typical timeline?
Very.
There's maybe 3
The
gave
few
me
that
this.
I've gotten lucky in all.
3
the
gave me
papers
this
I've
laptop.
gotten
The laptop.
published, like,
The laptop itself.
Wow.
at
Because
most
she
a
broke
year.
it a couple of years ago and she didn't know how to fix it.
No,
So she got a new
Oh,
one.
you
And
submit
I was like, I
somewhere,
will
get rejected,
fix
you
your
submit
computer
elsewhere.
and have it
You
work
get
fine.
feedback. Sometimes the feedback
How
is
do you fix
good,
it?
and you can address the
Keyboard.
issue.
I just
Sometimes
check
the
out
feedback
and the
is,
keyboard in.
negative.
Yeah, you
have
just
to
like
go
there.
elsewhere.
The thing is, there's like 32.
But like
Yeah,
graduates
you're
have
trying to
to
screw
do
these on the yeah, underneath any screw.
Yeah.
So and then there are screws within the plate, and then you feel it to slide.
Segmenting.
This is my monkey.
Pin strip.
You're segmenting different cortical areas.
Yeah, this is a deformation of the brain overlapped with known anatomical
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
areas.
Wait, man,
So these are penetrations. This is gray matter, white matter
Yeah.
things.
Okay.
So now I gotta go back
So
and
for
like
this it was
look at
really
receptive
just, like,
fields I found within these white matter patches to
the
see
other
if it makes
DAs
sense
had,
that it
like,
lines
actual
up with
classes
these.
to do it, and
That's
the only
why
thing that
We did.
I like actually get paid for the semester, so
That's cool.
I can really tell them that no, I'm not gonna do this.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I'm gonna take Shanna in at 10 a.m. to grab
I'm trying to figure
Batman.
out the lip text.
And then I'm gonna show her it clean. Like, not, she's not gonna do it. She's
Is
gonna watch
it?
me clean.
Okay. 'Cause I need to
And
go
depending
find
what
my
time we're
tickets, and I'm
done,
trying to
we
fly
can
with
for
the
application.
Responsibility.
Oh, dude.
And and then you might just
I gotta
pick
pick
up
up
that.
I know.
Or just
the dinner for
depending.
Friday and
Well,
the
no,
breakfast
I
on Saturday.
I was like,
I gotta buy all the
oh,
booze.
I should go.
That's
like,
cool.
And they
Arguably the
increased
most
the price
important
today.
thing
All this time I was like,
Yeah,
let's go,
I always
let's go.
buy a little extra and then.
Yeah.
It's like so
Give.
stupid, but I kept postponing
Kathy
it.
did.
I'm like, oh, let's go to Amsterdam.
Well,
Well,
train.
I went
Yeah,
like
I'm
out with you
train.
guys the other day. Yeah, like, that's
But,
true.
you know, I have like a case of beer.
So I'm gonna go
You know, it's
before
my hard work.
I take a cab
That's right.
and go there and like.
Oh, it's just beer, not hard liquor?
Yeah, no, I never buy liquor. It's just, you know, I buy
Yeah, I really like that one,
stuff
right?
like
Yeah,
that.
for the
Sorry.
splash.
There's like nothing.
Go over there after work.
Rings and stuff.
Yeah.
Happy
My brother's
Yeah, I
girlfriend.
kept
Do
inviting
you do a lot of this stuff?
spread
Like,
the word.
do you
I'm
do-
like, why don't you just
Do you do single cell recordings as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like nobody responds to it.
I mean, so what are you? Just
This
mapping
This is
out
my monkey.
area?
This is my gray matter, white matter patches that I mapped out. So I
Oh,
gotta
okay.
figure out if the penetration that I think I'm at is the right area.
Do you guys use BrainSight?
Which one?
BrainSight?
No, we use Carrot. CARET.
Yeah, I know Carrot.
It's loaded with all of the Von Ness and Lewis, Von Ness and Feldman, yeah, all the known maps. Like all of these are known areas you can click on here and cut into these. Although some of them, like, okay, MST, VIP, but some of them says like 5.
But is there like a stereotypic space that you put this in? Is it
Yeah,
like,
so when these monkeys are fMRI, when they have their MRIs done, then they're, their ear bars and the anterior commissure marks.
yeah, exactly. Like you, it's almost like cataracting it, where you align it along a gradient or like
Yeah.
ACPC
The
plane. or
problem is
something like that.
there's two problems. This monkey was done years ago when he was a kid, and his head's much bigger than his. And the second thing is, whoever did it, his brain is tilted 10 degrees. So that fucks up.
Yeah, we have one monkey like that.
So what did you do to reconcile this? Just keep it in
I
mind.
got 4 nights in Washington DC.
So-
like get there the night before and then
Really?
the morning after.
With
That's cool.
BrainSight, we're
Wait,
actually
so where are you
looking
going? You're
at
going
the.
to Georgetown? So this is your
So I'm-
second?
This is actually the
I've
MRI
been here
of your
pretty
monkey,
much. I
right?
feel like the-
These are-
Deformed, though,
Okay.
too.
No, everyone's
Yeah.
here.
You got a haircut.
I did. So you see, I'm becoming. I'm going to edit this bit out of the YouTube
Yeah, I
video.
can't remember
I'm
whether
becoming. I'm catching up on things. I'm catching up on writing back to people's project ideas, which is long overdue. And you can tell I'm getting more caught up on things because I got my haircut. So you know.
So now I'm gonna like.
So So next week is spring break, right? Which probably means more to undergrads than to graduate students. There's no such thing as spring break for graduate students, right? Well, any break actually.
It's awesome.
Christmas Day doesn't exist. Yeah. But
One class.
yeah. So anyway, this has the consequence that there's no class next week, but there is afterwards. So okay. So anyway, so as I said, I've replied to many, but not yet all of you on project proposals, which is totally my fault. But by the end of this week, I will have replied to everybody. I truly apologize about that. So let's pretend that I've actually replied to everyone's emails on that, and say, so after that point, what will be the next step? Okay. So from now on will be the stuff that I don't mind having included in the YouTube. Okay. Okay. So what I think and this is pretty much what I've been putting in my replies to people. You know, one of the really kind of crucial next things is to say, just get a picture of what is known about this topic, what's not known about it, what might some of the open questions be, and you know, that all sounds like a kind of statement of the obvious, but that's really the essence of research. I mean, those of you who are already doing research, you kind of know this already anyway, but finding the interesting questions is really a large chunk of the work. It's amazing how easy it is to just kind of, you know, start working on a project and not necessarily actually have kind of considered that carefully. Well, hang on a minute, why am I asking this question? And this is especially going to be the case if you're trying to write a kind of grant proposal type project. But it will also be the case if you're interested in doing a new analysis on an existing data set, because then again, the key question is, you know, what can I ask about this data set that's going to be interesting? Now, it doesn't have to be something that's going to change the world, but it can be something which is interesting, which is not just kind of, you know, telling us stuff that we already know. So you know, there's no kind of guaranteed. I'm going to send this out as an email to everyone too. But I mean, this will be up online. I think, you know, all of the PowerPoints are up online on that Piazza site, so the YouTube things. So a good way of kind of starting to get a handhold on this is find the recent review article. Now, I was going to do a session a while ago on, you know, like how you kind of search for literature and stuff, and then you guys were all, oh, we already know how to do that, so that's fantastic. There is actually one thing that I think just from chatting with people, I think not everybody knows, and that is that there's one thing you can do in PubMed that you actually can't do as easily on Google Scholar, or I don't think at Web of Science either, which is PubMed is particularly good for finding review articles, because the review articles are literally tagged with review. It's a surprising fact that many review articles don't actually contain the word review, and many articles that do contain the word review are not review articles. So Google Scholar just kind of does like a full text search, but it won't necessarily actually find your review articles on. If you go to PubMed and you just one of the terms that you type in is review, there's even a little kind of special checkbox for it. It will give you review articles. And those are extremely useful, because otherwise you can have just a ridiculous pile of things to read through. Now, I'm not saying don't read, you know, the original sources, don't read non-review articles, but for getting an overview of a topic, you really can't beat review articles, especially, for instance, Trends in Cognitive Sciences, Current Opinion Neurobiology is another good one. There's also Annual Review of Neuroscience, Annual Review of Psychology, but those will be much bigger and much longer and won't be as good for just kind of getting a quick overview. And one of the things that's particularly nice about Trends in Cognitive Sciences, and to some degree Current Opinion Neurobiology, is it even usually has a little box saying what are the open questions in this area. Now, because that means, you know, what are the open questions according to the people who happen to write the article, who are always good people, but, you know, you may think that there's other interesting open questions, and that would be great. But this is good for getting an initial handhold. So anyway, did everyone already know about this review tag? I don't know if this is like something, I mean, everyone seems to already know about searching for things, but this review tag. And then, as you all know, you can use, for instance, Google Scholar or Web of Science to find papers that cite the review. If you want to say, what's the kind of stuff that's happening right now? What are the questions that people are looking at right now in this particular area? A very good way of doing that is finding some recentish or even older review article and saying, you know, what cites this? So this is something you already know, but this will be a good next step to do for your project. And then here's the harder bit, but you know, this is something that will be facilitated by these previous steps. Try and find an open question. You know what? When you first start looking at any area in science, it looks at first like, oh my word, everyone's, you know, every single question has already been covered, everyone's already done everything, and then after you've dug into it for a while, you kind of realize, well, no, they haven't. And one way in which you can do that is you can say, well, people have done this, but they haven't kind of taken that, you know, to the n+1 step, and you can do a kind of variation on what's already been done. That's fine. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you might even kind of realize, well, hang on a minute, there's this kind of whole area that seems to be under people's noses, and they haven't really thought of looking at it at all. And that can be really interesting. So, you know, don't worry if you don't necessarily find that. That doesn't come along that often, but it might do. So these would be good things to look at next. And you know, I'll not be such a delay in that cycle of going back and forth on that, for which I apologize. So here are a few guiding principles. This is also what I've been putting in the replies to people. And this also, again, is true whether you're doing the kind of grant proposal-y type idea or whether you're doing the analysis of a data set idea, and this has been a kind of general theme of the course, this is a general theme of the field. You know, if the imaging is going to be worth its weight, you know, if it's worth kind of paying for all this fancy scanner, you know, it has to give something over and above what you would just be able to get just by sitting someone down at a laptop or giving them pencil and paper. So you want to try and get something over and above what you could get from behavior. And that's kind of a high bar. Now, you know, this is something to aim for. And that's a high bar. It's difficult because you can get so much from behavior. It's just amazing how much you can actually get from properly designed behavioral studies. So you might say, well, when is a case where you could, you know, it's kind of sensible even to start asking this question, are we going to get something over and above what you get from imaging over and above what you get from behavior with imaging? And, you know, this is not the only answer, but a guiding principle might be, try and think of an example, a time where people look the same from outside the head, i.e. from behavior, but different from inside, but they might be different inside the head. So one example of that is, you know, maybe catching the early signs of a process that isn't going to manifest itself until later. That's just an example. But, you know, just like, you know, why would you ever have an X-ray at a doctor's? Because from the outside, all the doctor can say is, yeah, there's swelling, you know, you seem to have hurt yourself. But from the inside, you can actually tell different. You can say, oh, okay, here's someone who's got, you know, swelling and a sore leg, but in fact, there's no fracture, so we'll treat them this way. Here's someone who has swelling and a sore leg, and in fact, there is a fracture, so we need to treat them a different way. So anything, if you've got a case where things look the same on the outside but might be different on the inside, that's an avenue for potentially finding some extra value added from imaging. And I think it's really worth asking that as a question, because it's certainly, if you know, if the imaging is just basically saying, well, someone did this task and then we found out that this part of their head lit up or that part of their head lit up, that is not necessarily telling anyone much extra, except just showing some pretty pictures. So what would be an aim of if you're going to try and get something extra from the imaging? What would the kinds of things to aim for? Trying to look for representations, trying to look for mechanisms. Again, this is easier said than done, but we've been looking in the class at some ways in which you can. And we're going to look in just a minute some ways in which you might actually get a handle on some representations or some mechanisms. For instance, by looking at neural similarity, that's what I'm about to talk about. Or by trying to relate neural activation to behavior, that's actually also going to be examples of that. So hopefully some of the classes are kind of showing some ways in which this might be able to go. So these will be the next steps, and I will be sending out email about this, and I'll actually be replying to the emails more quickly as well. And okay, so let's talk a little bit more about neural similarity. So in the last class, we ended by looking at this really beautiful work by Kriegerskorte and Chiani and colleagues, in which they were able to compare two completely different types of neural data. Data from human beings collected with fMRI, data from monkeys collected with single neurons, with electrodes. Lots of single neurons altogether. And they were able to take these two completely different types of data and actually compare their overall representational structure with each other by putting them both in terms of neural similarity. So it kind of allows things to speak a common language. But there's other ways of seeing whether neural similarity matters, and we're going to look at some examples of that today. I'm actually going to be talking about some papers that weren't in the reading list, but we'll kind of explain what the ideas are in them, hopefully. So a key way of seeing whether something matters is, does it relate to behavior? Back in the day in psychology, there was a great deal of debate as to whether there even was anything apart from behavior, and there's actually kind of sort of still some debate over that. It used to be the case that it was even forbidden to talk about things like mental representations or cognitive processes. It was believed that that was essentially a kind of almost superstitious statement, and that really this is what people thought. And it wasn't, because it gets very difficult very quickly to actually really say exactly what you're talking about. You can specify in very kind of hand-wavy terms, there's these processes going on inside someone's head, but you can't see them and you can't directly measure them. So it is difficult to say exactly what they are. But one thing that you really can see and you really can measure is behavior. So if you're going to talk about these things which you believe are happening inside someone's head, then being able to relate them to behavior is definitely a good kind of concrete handhold. Another way of suggesting that some of this stuff that we're trying to find neurally actually matters is if we can find that it captures some broader regularity. And one type of regularity is if it holds not just in one person's head, but if we find something that holds across many different people's heads. So some captures some population level regularity. So those are certainly not the only ways of saying that something matters, but those are two ways. So let's look at some examples of that. And the first set of examples, this was not actually in the readings, but we'll just kind of go through it, is looking at memory. And the real question is, why do we remember some things better than others? So can anyone give me an example of something that's kind of hard to remember?
It's hard to remember.
I'll give you a clue. Has any of you ever forgotten your password? That's not really a clue, that's an answer, right? Okay, so computer passwords are like a horrible, horrible thing. Why are they a horrible thing? Because computer passwords that are easy to remember are also easy for someone to hack, right? In general, right? If your password is, a word from the dictionary, then all somebody needs to do to hack your password is try, get some list of words in the dictionary, and these lists are out there, and have, if there's 40,000 words in that list, make 40,000 attempts on the password, and sooner or later they'll find it. And then you might say, okay, I'm going to have a word from the dictionary and put, a number at the end of it. Well, then, instead of having 40,000, they have now 400,000 because they just try, numbers 1 to 100 at the end of each thing. And this is how people's passwords get cracked all the time. Now, the great thing about those kind of passwords is they are easy to remember. But then if you ever been to one of these websites where it says, often for like something completely unimportant, like, just putting a comment on YouTube or something, your password must be at least 8 characters long, must contain a special character, must contain upper and lowercase letters, must contain numbers, stuff like that, okay? So then you have this kind of weird, randomish string that's impossible to remember, but also is much harder to hack. Okay? So there's kind of basic psychological facts about things which we can remember, which are sometimes useful and sometimes not so useful. So psychologists and also cognitive neuroscientists have been very interested in this question of, what's happening in these things that you remember better, and what's happening with the things that you remember worse. And if you think about memory, well, there's lots of things going on in memory. There's actually different types of memory. Many of you will have studied this. But the process of kind of forming a memory and then pulling it out afterwards has at least two parts of it, which are typically referred to as encoding and retrieval. So if you say, okay, if I have a memory which is somehow really good and I successfully remember this afterwards, then there's at least a couple of different things, and these are not mutually exclusive, at least a couple of different things that could have been going on. One is that when I made this memory, I somehow encoded it more deeply. I somehow, wrote it better. I wrote it in, more permanent ink. Or the other one could be that, everything's just written in pretty much the same way, but some of them I managed more successfully to pull out afterwards. It's kind of like reaching in and grabbing a ball from the bottom of a bag or something. Some of them you just happen to grab out better. So people in cognitive neuroscience have asked this question of, can we actually figure out whether we find any evidence that items are encoded better or they're retrieved better according to whether we actually subsequently remember them or not. Does anyone happen to know any kind of tricks? They're called mnemonics, actually, for encoding things more deeply. Any of you ever read any of these kind of like how to remember things better kind of tricks? Some of these are actually they actually kind of work, some of them.
I can't ever remember the trick for remembering how many days there are in a month. But like everyone always tells it to me and I just can't ever remember it.
Oh,
That's
okay.
something I always forget.
Okay. But it's probably like a little rhyme or
It's
something,
a rhyme,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else knows it. 30 days, something.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah,
we're
30
right.
days have September, April, May, and November. All the rest have 31, but something like that. It rhymes. Okay. Okay. So there's a trick right there. Okay. We're good at remembering rhymes. Okay. We're good at remembering. Now, why are we good at remembering rhymes? That's an interesting question. Okay. I'm not sure if people even know the answer to that question. But we're good at remembering things that form a little story. Okay. So if you have some arbitrary list of items that otherwise has basically nothing linking them at all, then if you turn that into a little, say, a sentence describing it, it's easy to remember. Like there's one of these for, remembering the colors of the rainbow or something. That's like Richard of York gave battle in vain. Well, that's kind of an English one. You probably don't have that in this country. Come to think of it, you're like, who's Richard of York? Anyway, okay, if you're in England, then you might. But anyway, so there's these tricks, and basically they all involve you kind of ascribing, turning something that's just an arbitrary list into something that has some meaning, something that has some structure. Another way is to kind of divide it into chunks. Chunking it's called. So anyway, so these are all ways of making something more deeply encoded. So a question in fMRI, and we're going to get to neural similarity in a minute, but first I'll show an example that is just looking at plain old activation intensity, is what's going on when something gets encoded more deeply? And can we find any neural correlates of that? And can we say, aha, these things that subsequently get remembered, they have such and such neural property, which the things that subsequently get forgotten don't have. So this is an influential early paper, came out in Science. I guess you guys, even young guys, all know this, that stuff that comes out in Science or Nature is kind of like a big deal. Okay, these are like the hardest journals to get. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that comes out in Science and Nature is good, and everything that's good comes out in Science and Nature, but it's kind of a big deal if you get those. Okay, so it's like getting a #1 hit. So this is a paper that came out in Science in 1988 by Anthony Wagner, who's at Stanford now. Building memories, remembering and forgetting of verbal experiences as predicted by brain activation. Okay, so what did they do? So they got people to study a bunch of words and then try and remember them afterwards. And then they sorted them afterwards into Have any of you seen this or related kind of papers already? There's actually lots and lots and lots of studies on encoding and retrieval these days. If any of you study memory, then you'll probably run into this kind of thing. You give people a whole bunch of words, and you say, and then afterwards you test them, and you say, you know, did you see this word before? Did you see that word before? And some of the words people remember, some of them they forget. So then you say, okay, we're going to sort the words. In fact, actually, in this case, they divide into words that people remembered with high confidence and words that they remember that they forget. And then you say, okay, let's sort the words into those that were remembered, those that were forgotten, and let's see if we can find any neural difference between them. And it actually already been shown with EEG that there's stronger EEG traces for, this was work by Ken Paller and colleagues, there's stronger EEG traces for subsequently remembered items, but you know that you can't really tell with EEG whereabouts in the brain these things are coming from. So well, they found a similar result with fMRI, but they were able to say, and in fact it's actually coming from these particular prefrontal regions. So this green trace is a little bit hard to see actually, but from each of these areas here, so different areas in the left inferior frontal gyrus, or a different area called the frontal operculum. This is, remember these hemodynamic responses that we were looking at? So this is a plot of the hemodynamic response. It kind of goes up, peaks around 6 seconds, comes down again. So for remembered items, you have a stronger neural response, and forgotten items, you have a weaker neural response. So now this is actually a kind of loose use of the word prediction, and this is many, many instances. This is not a criticism of this paper, because many instances of the use of the word prediction in science like this. What this actually means is correlates with. It's not actually the case that while the people were doing the scan, you know, they were doing the analysis right there and then, and they were saying, aha, I predict that, you know, 30 minutes in the future somebody's going to remember this word. What they were actually doing was they were collecting the data, and then afterwards they looked at it and they found that this correlated and would have predicted if you'd calculated it at the time, which is not exactly the same thing, but is sort of related. Sometimes people call that post-diction. So the stronger activation for remembered items than forgotten items, suggesting that these remembered items, there's something extra. This is activation while they're being initially presented. So this suggests that there's some extra kind of oomph in the encoding of these words. Like, you know, someone's being presented the word, and when their brain kind of really lights up extra, then that's the one that they're going to remember afterwards. And when it doesn't light up as much, that's the one which they're more likely to forget afterwards. Now, bear in mind also that, you know, this is just you know, there's error bars around these things. So some of the words are going to have higher activation but still get forgotten. Some of them are going to have lower activation but still get remembered. But on average, there's this difference between them. So what that suggests is that the more intense activation that happens when something's presented, especially in these kind of prefrontal regions, in this case this was words, so it was more kind of like left prefrontal, which is sort of where Broca's area is, which is a very important language area. These are the things that are going to get subsequently remembered. And so there's actually literally more than 1,000 papers that cite this, and you know, lots and lots and lots and lots of people started looking at encoding, retrieval, and subsequent memory. And there were actually 2 papers that came out in the same issue of Science. There was another one by Brewer et al. That did the same thing with pictures. So this is saying greater activation intensity, more likely to be remembered afterwards. So this is a nice connection between neural activation and behavior. The behavior is, did they remember it? Did they forget it? Now, one of the things I've been going on about in this class is, you know, just looking at activation intensity doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story, but it can convey some very useful information. So here's an example of it conveying some useful information. Well, what does this have to do with neural similarity? You know, is there anything extra that you can get from looking at neural similarity? So here's his study. This also came out in Science, but much more recently. This was from 2010 by Gui Zhui and colleagues. And this says, greater neural pattern similarity across repetitions is associated with better memory. So it's not looking at the activation intensity, it's looking at neural similarity. So here's an example of neural similarity actually really connecting to behavior. Okay, so let's have a look a little bit at what they did. So they were looking at what's known in memory as the encoding variability hypothesis, which basically says, what is the kind of stuff, what is the kind of process that's going to give you better subsequent memory? And one theory is that if you have a greater variety, greater variability in your encoding episodes, then that's going to be the kind of thing that's going to give you a big, strong, robust memory that's more likely to get remembered later on. So a kind of analogy of that is, suppose you want to get good at tennis. But if you just play against the same person over and over again, you might get good at beating that person, but it doesn't mean you're good at tennis in general. Okay? But if you play against loads and loads of different people, then you're really going to get good at tennis. So the variability in your learning there is actually important for that learning subsequently manifesting itself and you actually becoming a good tennis player. Now, there's an opposite hypothesis, which I don't think they actually named, but you could call it the encoding similarity hypothesis, which would say, no, you don't want all this variability. What you want is to have a similar pattern each time. And so, I like to kind of put things in terms of maybe overly concrete metaphors, but this would be a little bit like you're trying to make a dent with a hammer and you just like hit the same spot every time. If you hit the same spot every time, you're going to get a nice big dent. Okay? So these are kind of different hypotheses as to what's going to drive successful memory. So does anyone have, they did it actually with looking at different faces. You see the same face 4 different times, and you see a whole bunch of different faces, but you see each one 4 times. Does anyone have any kind of guesses or intuitions as to whether greater neural variability or greater similarity is going to make you remember the face better? It's not obvious. This is one of the signs of a good research question, right? That it's not just obvious what the answer is going to be. Sometimes you see studies that come out and people joke that they're published in the journal of "Duh, what did you expect?" studies or something like that, because sometimes I don't know. More stressful situations lead to greater unhappiness or something like that. I mean, it doesn't actually mean that these are actually worth the studies to do, not necessarily because it might be saying, well, maybe some types of stress are really worse than others. But sometimes, studies are generally more interesting if they tell you something that you didn't already know. Although or at least it wasn't obvious which answer would come out at the end of it. But there's a little bit of a danger there too, actually, because then you can have a tendency to really desperately search for the surprising or counterintuitive finding that makes you think, oh wow, that's really surprising. I didn't expect that. But sometimes these great, wacky, counterintuitive, surprising findings turn out actually not to work after all. There's a reason why they're kind of wacky and counterintuitive, because maybe they weren't actually right. So that's kind of a little bit of a tricky issue in science. But in this case, I think it's nice because it's really, both possibilities seem reasonable, but it's not necessarily obvious beforehand which one's going to come out to be the case. And it would actually have some implications which one comes out. Okay, so how would this be expressed in terms of neural similarity? So this is really a nice paper. They have this nice, I should upload this to Piazza, but you can all find it on Google Scholar. You know how to find these things. So here's a kind of diagram showing the hypothesis. Expressed in terms of neural similarity, what would this actually look like? So I don't know if you can see this very clearly at the back, but we've got a bunch of faces, and each one gets shown 4 times, and some of them are subsequently going to get remembered, and some of them are subsequently going to get forgotten. We don't know that at this point, which ones are which, but we're going to kind of go in afterwards and sort them out and kind of label them. Aha, yeah, they remember this one, they forgot this one. So the ones that are remembered are labeled with R, the ones that are forgotten labeled with F. So you've got like F4, that's like the 4th time you saw this face that you subsequently forgot. R4 is like the 4th time you saw this face that you subsequently remembered. So the hypothesis is, so this here is a little kind of color bar. This is just the hypothesis at this point, saying what would the neural similarity, so these are your multivoxel patterns. So you've got, I don't know if you can see this, so you've got 4 multivoxel patterns for the 4 times that you saw a face that it turns out you subsequently forget. 4 multivoxel patterns for the 4 times that you see a face that subsequently it turns out you remember. And then you can say, well, what's the, and they just use simple spatial correlation, what's the correlation between the patterns, the instances of the times that you saw the faces that you actually forgot later and the ones that you actually remembered later. So the hypothesis here is that if greater encoding similarity, if greater neural similarity is actually good, it's kind of, like hitting the same spot with the hammer again and again and again to make a deeper dent, then you're going to have a higher correlation. So this is the kind of color bar. So these kind of redder squares here represent a higher correlation. You're going to have a higher correlation between the neural patterns, multivoxel neural patterns are listed for the faces that you subsequently remember than the ones that you subsequently forgot. So that's the hypothesis. And I think, you might actually, for those of you who are kind of putting together a grand proposal type idea, if you can summarize your hypothesis in a nice kind of clean, intuitive picture like that, that's golden. That's really, really good. If your hypothesis takes, 1.5 pages of densely worded prose to describe, it might be a really interesting idea, but the chance of it kind of getting into the reviewer's head are quite low. So, I like this. I like this as a figure because it really kind of captures in nice, concrete, intuitive, rememberable, understandable terms, what this particular hypothesis would predict, and conversely, what the opposite hypothesis would predict, that you would have these things would be the other way around. So, in fact, this is actually an example of stuff that makes things nice and memorable, right? Here's deep encoding right here. It's intuitive, it's clear, it's visual. Okay, it nicely contrasts between the two things. All of this is stuff that helps us to remember things better. Okay, so that's the hypothesis. What did they actually find? So what they actually found was, so let's have a look at what's being plotted here. So they're taking some particular area. This is actually parietal cortex here. And this is a scatter plot of activation on the first repetition of a trial and the fourth repetition of a trial, first repetition, fourth repetition, for the faces that got remembered and the faces that got forgotten. And can you see this from the back, that this is a kind of more diffuse scattered cloud, and this